Vital Psychedelic Conversations. My name is Diego Pinzon, and today our guest is Kate Amy, also known as the Kinki Buddhist. How are you, Amy?
Yeah,
Kate.
I'm great. Yeah. Yeah, I'm doing great today. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Really excited to do this episode today with you. And let's begin with yourself. An introduction about yourself, your story. How did you get to where you are? You're a graduate from the second cohort of Vital.
hmm
So yeah, just tell us about yourself, tell us your story, and we go from there.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I'm a clinically trained psychologist and I've been working in private practice. It's almost a little bit daunting for me to add up the years now, but it's coming up to about 26 years. Yeah, it's been a long time. And in that time, I've had kind of three interest areas that I felt have overlapped only in maybe the last, five years, really, maybe a little bit more than that. But early on, I was quite interested. First of all, I was interested in yoga and Ayurvedic medicine. And then from there, I established an early interest in my early 20s in Buddhism and meditation. And that's been a big passion of mine that's continued. And that was alongside all of my therapeutic studies and going into private practice and um, getting quite a established grounding in psychodynamic psychotherapies, somatic psychotherapies, and later on Buddhist psychology, compassion focused type therapies. Um, and then the third thing that's always interested me is mysticism and shamanism is, kind of entering different containers and spaces where people have been playing with those concepts, creating different dynamics and processes, enabling people to explore in those kinds of ways. So the last few years, with the growing interest and re-emergence of psychedelic assisted therapies, I felt that these three interest areas have had a space to overlap. And I've been providing preparation and integration for people that have been pursuing psychedelic assisted therapies for quite some time now. And I joined the Vital program, which I found absolutely amazing and incredible, and was a reflection of those three interest areas in a lot of different ways. Um, to get a to to have the opportunity to be stimulated in the way, like be exposed to the latest research, the latest thinkers in this area, the latest people publishing, people with extensive experience, across this field, but also to be part of a growing community that wants to have conversations about this topic, which I found really amazing, incredible people from all over the world. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you,
So,
Kate.
yeah.
Thank you. That was a great intro. Very interesting stuff. And I'm glad you found some community in Vital. I think that's always something that students get from it. Really, really
hmm
important in this field. So my
Definitely.
next question, as this is one of the Vital podcasts, is what is the most vital conversation that we should be having now in the psychedelic space? What are your thoughts on that?
Mm. When you mentioned that we would discuss this question, I had a very quick answer to that. That I really believe we need to be having conversations, inquiring deeply into why we're pursuing psychedelic assisted therapy. What are we seeking in this therapy? What are people actually seeking? Um, because it's quite a powerful transformational. It can be quite a powerful transformational experience, and it can be a thing that people begin and need to pursue in different ways for some time to begin to get their answers. And it's gaining popularity for so many different conditions, mental health conditions, but also people recreationally seeking psychedelic experiences, but also people seeking spiritual experiences, psychedelic experiences. And I think there's probably some sort of commonality in terms of what people are truly seeking. So I think we need to discuss that. So that was my immediate response. But then I've been contemplating a little further recently. I was just completed teaching a silent meditation retreat. And after 7 days on a retreat like that, people have an experience of often a profound altered state of consciousness and different deep realizations about the nature of themselves, the nature of being a human being, and perhaps even some insights into the ultimate reality or the nature of reality. And they're very open and vulnerable and require integration. And I think that one of the most important conversations across all modalities that facilitate an altered state of consciousness is integration, is what is integration. And there was a lot of conversation in the Vital program about that, but I think we're only just kind of starting to flesh out what is like best practice in terms of integration, what it actually looks like, how it can be held most effectively. Yeah, I think there's a lot of different opinions there, and we're only just kind of like coming together, people that work in this area, to discuss and find the overlaps and find what works and find best practice. Yeah, so I think what is integration and how to do integration most effectively is some really important questions in this space.
Hmm. Wow, yeah, I think I love how you brought the experience of the meditation retreat and what can happen to people like having transformative experiences or insights into the nature of reality, which sounds very similar to some of the insights people get on psychedelic states. So I would like to, maybe if you can share with us, what is your approach to integration when people have these sort of experiences that can be they change your worldview and how you view yourself and others and the nature of reality.
Mm,
How do you approach this with people when they come to you or when they have these experiences? What is your approach?
mm, yeah. I think that something that I was reminded of just at this retreat recently was that we talk about integration. And if you're a professional in this kind of area, you're thinking about integration in terms of, integrating into your psyche some realizations that you've had or some insights into your own personality, your relational behavior, your relationship to yourself, or something like that. We think about the psychological, emotional kind of integration piece. But integration is, for me, is very much, and I think the first place to start is to consider how you're integrating back into your everyday life, into your the relational field that you exist in, the building blocks of your everyday life. So if we use the meditation retreat as an example, but a psychedelic experience can be just as powerful. You've taken time out from your everyday life. You have experienced an altered state of consciousness, or you have had some sort of shift in the way that you perceive yourself, your life in some way. And so integration is about how do you kind of you may feel like you're coming back to life as a square peg in a round hole, or whatever the terminology is. So there is some important things in terms of preparing people for integration that is about slow down. You don't need to come back and sell up your life and make some dramatic changes that it might have felt like the outcome of those realizations that you've had, or the natural step, or you may have started to fantasize about how you could live life completely different. but integration in terms of coming back into that stream of your life as it's already been established after having this experience that kind of might be very powerful and transformative, but exists kind of outside of that, involves slowing down, you know, having some compassion for the people around you, to also spend some time getting to know where you're at now and adjusting themselves to that space. That takes time. They maybe haven't had that experience or haven't had that dramatic shift, and really doing all those important everyday things of self-care, which might even be, returning to your routine of taking care of your health and your well-being. I think those building blocks are often overlooked, and we focus a bit too much on the emotional psychological aspect and trying to ground that down or integrate that, have that find its place. Whereas, like, just coming back and easing into your life, like the classic, Buddhist saying of, like, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Sometimes we just need to come back to the simplicity and to the building blocks of our life and become part of them, or come back into them, and let the psychological and emotional integration often takes more time. It can take more time. Yeah. So that's one really
Right.
important thing. I've probably said that in 3 different ways, but I think it is overlooked.
Yeah, what I take from it, slowing down. Yeah, I think it's super important, and having compassion for others after you go through transformational experiences.
Yeah, and compassion for yourself, if you're not really sure how it all lands, like being able to hold yourself with that compassion of, like, I don't need to figure this all out straight away. I can be in touch with these experiences and allow them to perfume or permeate my life in a kind of slow, gradual way for integration.
Absolutely, makes a lot of sense, and I think self compassion is very important. Going back to what you were saying about it's vital, it's very important to talk about what people are seeking when they come into this space. When people um, look for you, when they seek your services, what do you think they're seeking? Do you think they're all looking for healing, or what do you think they seek?
Hmm. Yeah, look, I think it is a common, we're kind of in the whole mental health space, which is based on the medical model. There is an idea that if we have a diagnosed mental illness, that we are ill and we need to heal, or we need to become well. So often that is the framework that people are coming to seek my assistance from, is like, I need to heal something. I need to heal some trauma. I need to, you know, um, heal in some way in order to be able to function in my life in some perceived, with quotation marks, better way. So sometimes it is for that. But when you kind of, like, unpack that and I guess ask, like, well, what would a healed state look like, or what would a more whole way of being look like? People are often looking for a greater sense of inner peace, a sense of quietude or peacefulness, a lack of, like, turbulence in their inner world. They're often seeking some insight into the nature of their struggles, or the direction that their life needs to take. And the last thing that people are often seeking is some greater sense of connection. And they may put that in a way, like, people will even say, my heart feels a bit closed, or, I just don't feel, I'm being with people, but I don't feel connection, or I don't feel the benefits of connection. So there's some experience of isolation that people are seeking to overcome. There would be the three things that I think people are referring to when they're referring to healing. And there would be the three categories of things that people are seeking to change in doing some sort of work with altered states of consciousness, or creating a different life through expanding their consciousness in these ways.
So inner peace, insight, and connection. Does everyone who comes to you, do they all have a diagnosis, or do they just feel like they're struggling in life, or are they seeking
Hmm.
something spiritual? Tell me about that.
Yeah. All of those. Yeah. I get people. It's very interesting with the popularity of the growing popularity, especially with Australia rescheduling for the growth of this area into psychedelic assisted therapies. People are knowing more about it, learning more about it, being able to watch Netflix documentaries about it, and are curious about how these things can give them greater meaning, greater insight, greater peace, and greater connection. And so people are definitely coming from each of those three starting points, maybe a mental health diagnosis, maybe just some curiosity. And also, people seem to be seeking these experiences because there is something of their, I think it's very innately human to want to understand the human condition, want to have more of a, I'll use the word spiritual experience of this life, or have some understanding of that. I think that that really happens for different people at different stages of their life, but for most people at some point in their life they have a few questions and some curiosity about this.
Thank you. So you mentioned that there's been growing popularity due to the rescheduling here in Australia. Do you
Yeah.
think, how do I frame this question? Do you think this has all been positive, or do you see more people going to like perhaps risky services, underground practitioners? What is your sense? Because I know you're in Byron Bay, and I think there's
Yeah.
a lot of people interested in psychedelics and spirituality in this area. So what's your view? How are things there?
Mhm. Mm. I can only speak from my practice experience and other people that have similar practices. And without, I don't want to. There's many very good practitioners out there, medicine people, people that work with medicines. But there is also, I have been seeing people that have had not so good experiences, that have had been to see a shaman or an underground therapist and had a very fragmenting experience, or had an experience that has not involved what I would think is adequate preparation or integration. So a quite unheld experience. So from my view, where I live, the people that I know that practice in a similar way, I would say the growing mainstream understanding of these therapies and popularity of these therapies is seeking people to seek people out that might practice them. And with that comes people not having the most ideal experiences. Yeah, which is pretty unfortunate and difficult.
Yeah, and I think about how psychedelics have sort of been pushed in, in Australia, sort of like they are substances that they're just going to heal you from your treatment resistant condition, and yeah, the diagnosis that you might have. And I imagine that you come with these expectations of being healed, and then you have this crushing experience, soul crushing experience if it doesn't go very well, if you're like with an unsafe practitioner. So that must leave people in a very vulnerable state. Do you come across people in these situations that might need some extra support, and how can you help them?
Mm, yeah. I remember when it was one of the presenters in the Vital program explained that integration can take anywhere from 9 hours, 9 days to up to 9 years or more. It's just saying it takes as long as it takes. And so if you've had a experience that has been very challenging, and not what you expected, and you weren't prepared in terms of examining those expectations, and maybe um, being coached or helped to have realistic or grounded expectations and preparation, um, that integration can be very difficult, because when we have a failed expectation and we come out not healed and perhaps with more material to work with than less, then that's going to take quite some time. And so, yeah, in my practice, I've seen people that have had a psychedelic experience 10 years ago and are still trying to integrate what that was and finding some inner peace with it within themselves, still trying to. And I've had people that, yeah, have had fragmenting experiences a year ago and are still trying to integrate that or find their way with other therapies to support them in continuing their journey to um, live well, live better, you know. Um, what I was also going to say on that is so we're just talking about, people having not so ideal experiences. Um, and I think this points to that to do this work or to hold these kinds of spaces, any practitioner, whether you're doing preparation, integration, or you're doing the direct dosing work in whatever setting, needs to have stepped some of that path themselves. Yeah.
I like that recommendation. I totally agree. I want to ask you something. What will be your advice to people who are seeking healing with psychedelics and have not had these substances before? What would you tell them?
hmm I think that it's important to, how I like to put it, and whether this is, I think it is kind of supported, but I don't think about these medicines as medicines, as we would traditionally think about, you're unwell and you take a medicine and you become well, or the medicine facilitates you becoming well. I think about these medicines as evolutionary medicines. You're interacting with a molecule, a substance that is going to, it's like putting some different software into the hardware of your mind and seeing how those two things come together and how that might give you a bit of a reset or a boost or a new perspective on things or different things. And those changes in perspectives, or that meeting of the software and the hardware, is not necessarily curative. It might be that we need to look at things. We need to look at where we have been, for example, self-sabotaging, self-isolating, where we have been our own worst enemy, where we don't hold ourselves with compassion, where we might be not keeping boundaries that are going to be beneficial or supportive of our wellness. These kinds of things, like these medicines, can show these things up, amplify these things, bring them into our awareness. Ultimately, I think it is for people's growth. I think that the majority of the psychedelic medicines have, if you're working with them in a respectful and reverential way, they have benevolent qualities. They're facilitators for the good of the person and the good of all. Um, but we need to approach them in that way, and we need to understand that they're not a curative. They're not going to get rid of the things that we don't want to experience anymore. They may actually be encouraging us to look at things in order to evolve in the way that we need to evolve.
I love that you highlight that first, these are not traditional medicines, as in the Western view of that we're just going to get rid of what's bad. You highlighted the importance of treating them with respect and reverence. I think that's really, really important, and they can help face those dark aspects of ourselves. They can show
Mm,
them to us and work with them.
mm,
There's a few things I wanted to ask you, because you lead Buddhist retreats, and there's people who experience meditation states. And for example, I've heard cases of people going to Vipassana retreats and having what Western society will call a psychotic break, where they need a lot of mental health support, which can also happen in psychedelics. So, what do you think is happening, or what do you think is the intersection or similarity relationship between psychedelic states and meditation states, or
yeah.
meditation states that you achieve when you do like rigorous, serious practice for hours a day? What do you think is going on there?
Yeah. Okay, so there's so many different ways I want to answer this. I'm going to see if I can answer it on a few different levels. So, first of all, something that we know both about some of the psychedelics that we're working with, or we have some evidence for, and we are continuing to work on the hypothesis, is that psychedelics, and you can Diego, you would know more specifically about this from your line of work, but they can deactivate the default mode network during the dosing session. There is some, not complete deactivation, but a turning down the volume of the default mode network. Is correct? Yeah.
Correct.
So does meditation. We've known for a long time that meditation affects that part of the brain as well. When we are toning down the default mode network, it's involved in attention, emotional regulation, self related thinking, and mind wandering. When the mind wanders, and usually the mind wanders towards projecting a self onto the future or onto the past. So if we've had a quietening of the default mode network, then we're not self referencing as much. Yeah. And if you're in a intense meditation container, like you said, quite disciplined, you're meditating for hours a day. And from the Buddhist lineage that I'm a part of, the disillusion of self is definitely part of the practice. So we're not only working with meditation in terms of training the mind, training the brain to be able to work in a way that allows the quietening of the default mode network, but we're also specifically guiding people to look at what is the self. So, more and more, you're bringing people into ground where they have less self referencing going on. And for anyone that has been in an intense meditation container, one of the responses, it's not the only response, but it's a common response to starting to enter that territory where there's no grounded sense of self, is fear and contraction. And I believe the same things can happen in psychedelic experiences. Yeah. So that can be liberating if we can work with the fear, let go of the fear, work past the fear if it's arising, and keep on letting go. It can be very liberating, to be unburdened of the self. Yeah. But there's a few conditions in which that can become really difficult in both psychedelic experiences and meditation experiences. If we don't have a compassionate, kind, loving relationship with ourselves to begin with, and we enter these things to get rid of a self, so it's almost a level of kind of like self-loathing or we're over ourselves and we want to get rid of it, then these meditation practices or using a psychedelic substance, which is going to loosen your awareness from this self anyway, can start to put people again in very fragile, tender territory. So it's because it's almost like a prerequisite for a smooth and healthy and unbumpy letting go of the self or ego disillusion is having a fairly good relationship with that self or that ego to begin with. It's like kissing a good friend goodbye for a little while, or allowing them to just sit over there and not be like right in front of you and getting in your way all the time. You can do that kindly. You can do that with a loving heart, right? But if you do that in a way where you're trying to push it away, that's your beginning point, or you have like hatred, self-loathing, you know, um, feelings towards that, then you can see that that process is not without tension and contraction, and not without fear and other difficult emotions coming up. So that's the terrain that people can enter if they haven't done some preparation, some sort of working towards that, or they haven't faced that aspect of their relationship with themselves in the process. So that's the next thing. And then, like the example that you gave, Vipassana meditation. Vipassana is a 10-day Goenka style meditation retreat. And don't get me wrong, I spent a lot of my 20s doing Vipassana Goenka meditation. Okay. One experience I had with that, I think I was about 3 10-day sits in or something. And I'd found it very disciplined. I was really trying to obey all the rules. And then I just had a thought one day. I was really having trouble sitting in the meditation hall. I think I was stiff. They want you to sit up all the time. And I was like, these are just guidelines. These aren't rules. There's no one really, they're encouraging me. And I went outside and I lay on the grass and I did the next meditation there. And I had a bit of a like breakthrough with my meditation. The moment that I loosened from this idea that it had to be so disciplined, that it was the way I was being told to do it was the only way, and that I could find a little bit of wiggle room for myself. So the Goenka style meditation, the way that it is set up and it is encouraged, I liken to Bikram yoga. If anyone knows Bikram yoga, where you're in a hot room, there's only so many moves. You have to stay the whole class, like you have to stay at the retreat the whole time. So it's a very rigid container. And so for many people, that can be too rigid. That can be, they can internalize those. Well, it's actually not, it's not really, it's that encouragement to be really disciplined, to stick to the rigidity, can dovetail with some of their own stuff and become quite challenging, where they feel like a failure if they're not doing it, if they feel like they have to meet these expectations. There can be a whole lot of like self-criticism and self doubt being encouraged by such a disciplined and strict container. And that can lead to people having psychotic breaks, fragmenting. And the same goes for psychedelic experiences or psychedelic containers. When there is attention to the individual needs of the person as much as possible, when there is availability to work through that and to make sure the person feels safe, to make sure the person feels that what they need to do, how they need to process the experience while they're having the experience is available to them, will be supported, then the person can feel really well held. They can feel really safe. If the container is not well held in those ways, then that can also contribute to the psychosis or the fragmenting that you're referring to, or those kinds of experiences.
Right. I think you've given us
So if we're going to become kind of loosened from our concepts of self and the way that we have understood and structured our world, if we're going to loosen ourselves from that, what can help to support that is that it's a really grounded and well-held container. We feel supported, we feel heard, seen, witnessed in a way that is loving and kind and compassionate.
wow. I think you've highlighted very important things, and I think on the first part, the importance of preparation before going into these experiences is really
Mm-hmm.
important, as you said,
Mm-hmm.
with the whole self-loathing, self-referential
Mm.
thinking. We want to be in a space where we are in a better relationship with ourselves, I would say. um,
At
I think
least a
that's why it's so
compassionate
important to have a
relationship.
good preparation, and at
Yeah.
least a
At
compassionate
least
relationship.
that's right. Yeah, we might know that we have parts of ourselves that struggle, parts of ourselves that feel deflated, despondent, disappointed, anti-life at times. As long as we're able to listen to those parts and relate to them as much as possible with some compassion, with some self-compassion, we can dialogue or we can be curious about those parts. Then we're well prepared for having a more intense journey into an altered state of consciousness.
Hmm. Makes sense. And also the importance of the container, as you said on the on the second part. You mentioned that the Vipassana retreats can be a bit too rigid, and that can cause issues for
For some
people.
people, yeah,
Yeah.
for some people.
Do you think a psychedelic container could be too rigid, or a psychedelic protocol might be too rigid, may cause issues too?
Um, I mean, I'm going to speak a little bit out of experience, but my understanding of some of the um, like Cambo and ayahuasca and some of the medicines from the South Americas is that they, in some traditions, have come from a mindset of being given to warriors, being given as there's an expectation that you kind of, in some ways that these medicines can be sat with, you warrior through. Yeah. And I think when that mentality comes to the West, or is applied to the West, and there's people coming with struggles with mental health issues, the expectation that these medicines are going to fix them or heal them or get rid of these issues. And then the container is held in a way where you have to deal with whatever that's coming up, and there's not kind of a one-on-one interpersonal relationship there to hold you, or to be utilized to help the process. That you might be in a group, or you might be, there's an expectation that you manage all of this yourself. And if you're not seen to be managing it, then you're failing in some way. I think that can be a real recipe for things to go a bit sideways, so to speak.
Right. I think that, yeah, that's also very important. I wanted to ask you if we can move into another
Sure.
topic that's
Yeah.
still related. I remember at the Embodying Psychedelia conference, you did a
Yeah.
presentation on shadow work. So
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, what is shadow work and why is it important for people going into psychedelics?
Hmm.
Yeah, as facilitators or even as participants? Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, it's a big one.
It's a big topic. Yeah,
I
it's a
mean,
very big
shadow
topic.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Western psychology has been adapting and expanding this concept of the shadow and shadow work from Jung's original writings on this. And there's probably, philosophy and writings on this that go back further than that, but in the psychological sense from Jung. And the idea here is that we have, aspects of ourselves that are not known to us necessarily. They are expressions of our subconscious. They're expressions of parts of ourselves that we might not be conscious of. And yet they are being expressed through us and shaping our reality.
Can you give us an
And
example?
that it was interesting. I wanted to do that workshop because I know that this shadow work gets very confusing for people. It's like, well, how am I supposed to do this shadow work if it's part of myself that I don't know? But there's different ways that we can come to know our shadows. And it might be through the feedback from someone else. It might be through looking at what we're most attracted to in the field in other people, but also what we're most propelled by. What we have strong reactions to is often a reflection of something deep within our unconscious that is driving our judgments, perceptions, and behaviors. Um, and shadow work can get very subtle too. It can feel like we're stalking parts of ourselves that are kind of just out of the corner of our eye or just to the side or slightly just behind us. And my experience is that the shadows get more subtle the more that we do this work. So shadow work becomes very important, understanding it, um, seeing it as part of the work, and eventually maybe even the work. Because when we enter altered states of consciousness, whether it be deep meditation experiences or through the use of psychedelics, that those states allow the softening of our defenses, not only those defenses that protect us from taking on board the opinions or the things that we're not keen on absorbing from other people or keeping people away, but we also have internal defenses against looking at aspects of ourselves which might take us into tender, vulnerable places or confront, very much our understanding or of who we are, or some sense of a immovable, solid sense of self that confronts that I am this. So when we enter these altered states, defenses are softened, and we can start to get a feel for some of these things. We can start to see, oh, yeah, for example, like the way that I pander to someone, or in the beginning stages of a relationship, actually leads me to feeling like they are using me in the end, or something like that. I'm contributing to that myself. There's something that I'm doing to affirm my worth or value that is creating my reality, which we may not have been able to see before. But that can become more, there's some clarity can be created on these things when we have time in deep contemplation and meditation, or whether we take time to allow a psychedelic medicine to expand our awareness and help us to have a look. So when an understanding of what shadow work is, and that shadow work is a continuous process, allows us to put these experiences in that context. And when something arises, we can be curious. Oh, look at that. How can I come to a better relationship with that? Do I need to drill a little bit deeper into that, see what's underneath, what's pushing that, what's guiding that? How could I actually have a different relationship with myself, or a different relationship with this part of myself? Can I then from that act differently in the world and have a different outcome? So that's for the practitioner, sorry, not the practitioner, but the participant in these kinds of things. But that workshop that I did at Embodied Psychedelia was also looking at what are the shadows at work in people that are holding medicine spaces or are doing this kind of assisted therapy. And that was very interesting, because the things that the 80 odd people in the workshop identified were things like spiritual bypassing, the abdication of responsibility for participants' well-being. It's, like that's something that you have to deal with. My kind of work's done now. They were also identified some inflated ego shadows at work, where people would present themselves as like more spiritual, more insightful, more enlightened than the person that they were dealing with. And from that kind of superior viewpoint, the other things that I just talked about, spiritual bypassing, abdicating responsibility, these kinds of things would arise. So I often come back to my Buddhist roots in this stuff, because really when the Buddhist philosophy um, points to the wisdom that we are all interconnected. We are all interconnected. And not only that, but we are all holding different views, experiencing very human struggles, and experiencing the beautiful things in life. And we experience those things in very similar ways. Um, and so it's really that wisdom becomes like a great leveler, that no one is kind of like one rung higher on the evolutionary ladder or on the spiritual staircase than another person. We're all on our own individual journeys. We're all more alike than dissimilar. And that when we hold a space of seeing each person as both um, a friend and a teacher in themselves, then we're less likely to hold that superior position or hold that position that better, and we come into more or the collaborative, responsive and compassionate places with each other.
There's
Does
a
that
lot in
answer the
there.
question? I went on a really long
Yeah,
tangent there.
yeah, but I think there is a lot of there, and I think a lot of gold, particularly for I think with psychedelic practitioners. I think what you mentioned, what came up to participants, was super interesting. I think it's also good to highlight the sort of like the healer complex, the people
Mm,
that come into this work that say that I'm here to heal other people. I
mm,
think that we can be ignoring our own work. We can be
mm,
projecting our suffering into other people.
mm.
Taking things on that aren't ours.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's so many things. There's so many.
yeah. And it just points to, if I would advise, and this has certainly been my path, like um I've done Jungian analysis, I've had a somatic therapist, I've had many different therapeutic experiences, and I continually look for the next one to work with for a few years, because my work's never done, like. And so that idea that, yeah, it's almost like, well, actually early on in my career I realized that the best thing that I could do, it was a early supervisor gave me this advice. They said the best thing you can do to be a good therapist is put yourself in therapy, so you know what it is to be a client. Yeah. And then I also realized from that is like the more that I am seeking to be an authentic expression of myself, that I'm stalking my own shadows so that I can turn up with the least amount of layers and impediments and barriers between having, direct, authentic, real contact with another person in the therapeutic container or elsewhere. That becomes the actual work. That's just as much as the work as being in process with someone and having a good understanding of psychopathology and process and therapeutic skills and all of the other little building block pieces. It's like your presence and your authenticity and working towards that um, means that any contact that you're having with someone becomes much more powerful and much more real, and you're walking the talk.
That sounds beautiful. The presence and authenticity, and that leads me to think about something how you present yourself, and I would love to hear more about this as the Kinki Buddhist.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that, because to me that's super interesting. I've never heard
Yeah.
of this before. So
Yeah. So the Oxford Dictionary definition of kinky is like kink. A kink is like a bend in a rope or the curl in someone's hair. It's like points to anything that doesn't go straight and has a bit of a bend in it can be a kink.
like a deviation.
And I kind of use the Kinki Buddhist because I don't believe any of us, no matter how hard people try, I've never seen anyone in the 26 years of my practice that has the life that they have planned in a straightforward way. We all come up against unexpected kinks and curves along our path. And I think that's where the magic happens. That's where transformation is possible. That's where we are molded by the life, the cosmos, the universe to reveal more of ourselves. It's not entirely up to us to control and decide the way our lives should go. And so that's one definition of kinky. And of course, kinky is also what's kind of understood as anything that has a sexual kind of nature that's not the norm. And I also think that these things have existed since the beginning of human history, and they've definitely been in the shadows of culture and society, and have been emerging more and more to be something that needs to be acknowledged and accepted and normalized. So yeah, that's something that I understand well, that I'm interested in, that I have a community that is interested in this area. And I think, well, my experience actually has been in my early days as a therapist, kinks were pathologized. Kinks were not understood to be in the normal range of human sexuality expression. When I saw some clients that may have been willing to disclose these things as part of something that they were struggling with, I remember early supervisors trying to find a diagnosis for this, or trying to find a deep uh, I say pathological because not like a compassionate understanding, but more of like, there's something wrong with this. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, and over my work, over the history of my work as well, I've come to understand that clients won't bring these kinds of things into the therapeutic relationship, won't disclose these kinds of things, their explorations into sexuality, their explorations into things other than mainstream sexuality, if they feel that it's not welcome or will be misunderstood. And so my positioning of the Kinki Buddhist is to say it's all welcome. There's no straight lines. Yeah.
Beautiful. I imagine this might also have to do with Buddhism and psychedelics. On paper, or like a lot what I read about Buddhism, when the five precepts, there's a precept of not taking any intoxicants, for example. um could you tell me more about this, you as a Buddhist practitioner,
Yeah.
and this precept? Yeah, what are
Yeah.
your thoughts on this?
Yeah. So, I mean, there will be a lot of Buddhist scholars around, and I'm definitely not a Buddhist scholar. I'm a Buddhist practitioner. But Buddhist scholars have spent a lot of time translating the Buddhist text, all the different Buddhist texts, from Pali, the original language, and from other languages that the Buddhist texts have been translated into across India and Asia, um, to into English. And so you're right. One of the precepts is not to not to take any mind altering substances, to have clarity of mind. The way that I have understood that is that those precepts are taken when you're taking refuge in the Buddha Dharma, which is often in a retreat space. So, for the duration of a meditation retreat, you're applying yourself to the practice, to the teachings, to applying the teachings. So, those precepts are to guide you in doing that. Yeah. When I have questioned some of my Buddhist teachers about the precepts, they have said, yeah, look, we read them as don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. Like, don't harm any other living being, don't participate in sexual misconduct. Yeah, but we actually don't do any unpacking of that. And I have had Buddhist teachers that have said, look, it's actually about not engaging in the use of substances to the point that they are taking away your clarity of mind. Just like we would advise someone that having a glass of red wine once a day has health benefits. Yeah. The antioxidant health benefits, but having a whole bottle is actually going to cloud the clarity of your mind and have detrimental health effects. So there is some interpretations that are about it's for use when you're taking refuge in the Buddha Dharma and really undergoing some focused practice. And that if you're referring to the precepts in your everyday life, it's like, what is right for you without losing clarity of mind? Yeah. I've also had like another Buddhist teacher actually say to me that he believed that I think it's there is some suttas that which is the reportings on the Buddhist teachings, where he believed the Buddhist teachings probably came from eating mushrooms.
Wow.
Yeah, some suggestion that maybe there was something else involved. And look, another medicine that I'm very interested in is the lotus, the blue lotus. And as you would probably know, like the blue lotus or the lotus flower is in Egyptian mythology, it's in Mayan culture, it's right throughout India and Hindu texts. And the Buddha is often depicted sitting on a lotus. And the lotus, the blue lotus and the white lotus, I believe, and even the red lotus, all have psychoactive properties when you drink them in a tea. They're
Right.
calming,
Wow.
they have a natural opioid, they affect the serotonin and dopamine systems. So, I also wonder whether the Buddha was sipping on a lot of lotus tea as he had these profound insights into the nature of reality.
Right. And I think in Zen Buddhism, they use green tea. I think I've heard. I think in America, I don't know, but I heard it's a thing. It definitely alters the mind. Not as much as a psychedelic, but I've heard of people using microdosing to aid meditation. So Yeah, I like what you say about if it affects your clarity of mind, then um, you'll probably be more mindful of it as a Buddhist practitioner.
Mm, yeah.
Is there anything else that you want to say or you want to discuss?
Yeah, probably just I mean, why I think there is a lot to be said for the application of some of the Buddhist teachings to the journey through psychedelics or with psychedelics. There's two things. Like, one is that I once had a participant in a workshop on psychedelics, meditation, and the self describe psychedelics, and this is in their experience, as getting the helicopter to the top of the mountain, and then taking in the view and having all of these kind of expansive realizations. And they said, look, when the psychedelic experience is over, you don't necessarily get the helicopter all the way down to the bottom of the mountain, but you do come down somewhat. Yeah. I would say meditation is like doing the climb. There's no helicopter. You start at the bottom of the mountain and you climb to the top. If you are a dedicated practitioner, you take time to do retreats and you work at it. And so if you've got the helicopter up to the top and you come somewhat down, the temptation for people is to keep on getting helicopter rides up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down. At some point, to integrate and to actually be able to live with a more expanded heart space, with more peace, quietude, stillness, serenity inside, to feel our interconnectedness, our oneness, to actually live more from that place and less in the retraction or the contracted kind of space, requires some sort of practice. And I would say mindfulness and meditation practice is the practice that will establish that for you. So I think it has a place with preparation and integration as a technology for integration, for creating lasting change, for being able to spend more time dwelling in these spaces than not within the self. Um, so that's one thing. The second thing is that the Buddhist teachings um, are the most profound map of consciousness that I've come across in terms of what happens when you start to when you start to go through experiences that are like an ego disillusion, or you start to lose contact with identification with the body, or what happens when you start to abandon the mind starts to abandon concepts of time and space, you know. So there is some outlined states in Buddhism called the jhana states, which is the movement from form states of consciousness, relative truth, into states of realization of the formlessness, non-perception, and universal truths. And I think these are very useful for understanding what people achieve or where they end up in psychedelic experiences, both what occurs to get there, but also how to come back into form. Yeah, how to come back into form and how to put these layers back on and then interact with the world. That the Buddhist philosophy has the most profound mapping of this that I found. I would love someone to tell me some other things, but it's very impressive considering this guy lived 2,000 years ago, pre-Christ, pre all of this stuff, and some of his concepts, the Buddha's concepts, are dovetailing with current understandings or hypotheses in quantum physics. It's quite remarkable.
Yeah, I look forward to us, or like our society, integrating these maps or using these maps to navigate these states of consciousness. Because yeah, I agree, it's also maybe the most sophisticated map that I have encountered, yeah, with the jhanas. And I think one of the big, how is this, I'm not sure if you will call it a book, one of the big texts on it, I think the Vishuddhimagga, if that might be the one, yeah, one of the texts that explains like the progressive stages of the jhanas and of dissolution and all of that. So much to explore. I think something to revisit as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for sharing your expertise, your knowledge, your wisdom. It has been great to have you here. And any last words for people?
No, just that it was fabulous to meet you, Diego, through the Vital program. And yeah, that I just think an incredible training program has been put together in that course. And I feel so much gratitude and appreciation that that it is available and it's being developed continuously.
Thank you so much, Kate. And yeah, it was great to meet you too. It's great that we cross paths. And thank you so much. We'll leave it like that.
Okay. All right.